I want to talk today about digital potential and reinventing business. You'll hear a lot over the next couple of days about best practices, some new technologies, and how to reinvent different types of lab processes and so on. And I think all that's fine. You have to do that. But you want to do this with something in mind. You want to be thinking about what is the digital trend and why is it important for your business. So today we'll talk about digital potential. Before I get into it, though, how many people here are familiar with Pokemon? All right. I've never played it. I think it's an absolutely ridiculous game. But the developers on here did something really interesting. And by the way, this is the most highly downloaded app, I think, ever. So it's done something different. It created a new experience. And if you think about this, they got kids off of the couch, off their phones, to actually go out into the world and to go to town commons and try and catch these elusive little monsters all around, places probably where they shouldn't have been. I mean, there's some stories about them, treading on Holocaust memorials or, breaking into people's property. But it did something really interesting. It created new relationships for people in cooperation or sometimes in competition to play the game. It did something else pretty interesting too. It created an augmented reality, an augmented data layer over the real world, a new way to interface with things that are there, that are real, and things that are not real. And then also, within this app, in the power of our hand, we have actually quite nice BI and visualization capabilities. In the game, there are ways to power up so you can get more energy to catch these little monsters that are running around. But people that play the game, they know how much further along they have to go in order to get to the next milestone or to the next journey. So we asked the question, what if we could provide a similar type of experience within the laboratory? I'm not saying to go out and build a Pokemon game for the lab, but what if we can address the user interface, the BI and visualization, the analytics, the capability to create a next generation experience? Now, next generation technologies render previous generation technologies obsolete. It changes the dynamics. This is a picture of the F-35 helmet-mounted display. This, I think, it's a ridiculously expensive program that was run here, but they did something really interesting. When they started to design this interface, they were trying to figure out how to make a pilot faster and better with the streaming complex information that's coming in. They were trying to develop a next generation of air superiority. And they did this with a design spec of trying to develop unparalleled situational awareness. Now, think about that for a moment. Unparalleled situational awareness. In most of our environments, we have information that's coming at us from all sorts of different directions. This pilot wearing this helmet-mounted display can look through the plane, can look on the horizon. Every time there is a trajectory of some sort, that information gets logged and gets stored. And then they apply that, and then the system learns. And it's able to better predict where that target's going to go the next time it comes into the field of view. It augments different data layers at the same time. And there's naval intelligence, there's air intelligence, there's army intelligence. All this different information is being curated and with algorithms running in the background so we can better connect to both the people on the ground, the people that are on the ships, the people that are back at different types of battlefields, but also they're connecting to the things underneath the wings. They're connecting to the things. The things are beginning to speak. And it does this in real time. Now, I think this is a great analogy. I'm not pro-defense or anything, but the application of the technology is very similar to what we're trying to do. Instead of targeting on the battlefield, we're trying to target cancer. We're trying to target different disease. We're trying to target better quality, whether it's food and beverage or better process if it's energy and utilities. Lots of our businesses here. Wouldn't it be nice if we could create a new experience, a similar experience, where we can better understand and predict what's going to happen with our data? We can have augmented scientific intelligence coming in at different layers, and we can contextualize that information at the right moment and the right time. What if we had the capability to look at that operations data, that quality data, and develop an intelligence layer, an insight engine? And what if we could connect not just to the devices, but we could actually become patient-centric if you're a pharma, or consumer-centric if you're in retail, and deal with information in real time. This is what we're trying to do. We need to generate this unparalleled situational awareness within the laboratory as it relates to the processes that feed through it. So today I'm going to break this into 3 different sections. Usually when Gartner gives presentations, we talk about top 10 trends and so on. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to key in on a couple that I think are going to resonate here. But I want to talk about what digital really means, because there's a lot of confusion out there. And then I'll key in a little bit on business moments and Internet of Things, and then what we can do when we go back home next week to realign and set our strategies. Okay, so first things first. Digital is one of those terms that's being thrown around a little too liberally. It's, we've seen this before. We've seen it with cloud, we've seen it with big data, we've seen it with all sorts of different types of scientific disciplines. And it's important for us to be able to articulate what the differences are. I often hear digitize, digitalize, digital. I've seen the D as a prefix in front of a project just to get priority funding. And it's quite comical after doing this for a couple of years, seeing the number of digital strategies that emerge that have nothing to do with digital business. All right, so the first thing you have to do is you have to calibrate. We need to level set. If you see the word digitize, digitize is about paper replacement. It's about taking paper-based process and then scanning that paper and turning that into bits and bytes. Okay, that has high value, but that's not digital. Electronic applications. I need a LIMS, I need an ELN. X plus Y equals Z. These are these engineered, pre-programmed business rules. There's some automation built in, has some value as well. We tend to focus on BI and visualization, and these are important. This is what got us to where we are today. But digital is much different. Digital is about dealing with flexible information, real-time information, the moment of that information, not waiting for a report in order to have a meeting and to give an update, but to actually be able to make the decision in real time and then to be able to be flexible about that information, to reconfigure, and then learning over time. That's what digital is really about. So to simplify it, I've heard a lot of discussion already in the last 24 hours about, well, we need a better data capture strategy. That to me is actually more of a digitized approach. Or we need an ELN or LIMS, was that number 2 and number 3 on the survey? That's ridiculous. You need the capability. You don't need the system. You need the capability. The capability can be delivered a bunch of different ways. When I hear the term digital lab strategy, then I think of platforms. And then how can we leverage the data and build in the tools that we need to give us these different capabilities so we can have those digital moments. That's the direction. That will give us that unparalleled situational awareness within the lab. Here we go. There's another concept too, digital business. And I showed this slide last year. Digital business represents the convergence of the real world and the digital world, or the virtual world coming together, but it does something different too. It's no longer just making decisions between the staff scientist and the lab notebook. It also introduces things into the equation. And things can have a lot of different meaning. Here, mostly we'll talk about IoT enablement. Smart devices, smart reagents, smart packaging, but the things, that transaction at the middle of people, business, and things, that's what's new about digital business. So a couple of years ago, we had talked at Gartner about different forces impacting all of industry, including the lab environments, whether it's food and beverage, oil and gas, or pharma. And we talked about what was the nexus of forces. The nexus basically is the power of cloud, and there's lots of different kinds of cloud, the power of social and collaboration, how can we better share our information, the power of mobile, how can we extend our applications and data to any device, and then the power of information, or big data handling and advanced types of tools. That's what enabled us to reimagine business, including labs. And we've seen some new vendors in this space starting to offer pure cloud-based plays. And then we're moving towards this driving decisions in the moment around digital business with the inclusion of things. And the way that we get there is with some IT practice where we can We can basically set two different speeds for IT for two different styles and approaches in order to execute. And this is paving the way for what we're calling algorithmic business. This is the really cool stuff that's coming. And you'll read a lot about this over the next couple of years in the Wall Street Journal and Forbes and The Economist and so on. And we're somewhere back here. We're still kind of figuring out. And as an industry, or I should say as a life science industry, we're going to be a little bit further back than some of the other industries that we've seen. So we can actually learn from some of these other industries, best practices, approaches, tools, techniques. But when you think digital and that unparalleled situational awareness, you want to think, how could you better predict the outcome for a lab process at any altitude, up and down, left and right? Imagine that over time, after you're collecting data, the information systems get smarter and smarter. And then they start to suggest questions that you should ask, leveraging new advanced types of tools. And this will enable us to create new business models. And that's where the real value is. It's in taking our processes and creating a new business model by repackaging it with other types of technology, but leveraging new data sources, leveraging new practices, new governance models and skills, and then eventually leveraging advanced analytics, getting out of stats. Everyone with the LIMS is involved in stats and SPC. That helps, but that's not data science. That doesn't lead to insights. We need capabilities for advanced analytics. You have to start to build that into your roadmap. Now, the people, business, and things, we have to understand the relationships. We have to improve some of those relationships. And that's not easy. That's not easy. But certainly, we can think of different types of paradigms. Instead of going to a lab instrument, recording data, then going to a notebook, and then recording the data, and then transcribing it incorrectly into an ELN or a LIMS, that's a lot of the paperless strategies. You've seen everyone walking around with tablets and Post-it notes. We need to change that dynamic. We can directly print. We can bring the information to the instrument. The instruments can know where we are within the lab to better contextualize that information. And these are some of the most interesting roadmaps that we've seen with clients that are starting to re-architect what they want to do in the lab. And they're putting in the building blocks to do that today. Now, over the next couple days, we'll hear a lot about IoT. I like IoT, but I don't think IoT is really the answer. The answer isn't chipping all the instruments. The answer is in IoT analytics. Sorry, this is a very low. I can crouch down a little bit. The first thing we need to do is we have to figure out how to connect. Okay? And it's not trivial because you have instruments within and beyond the firewall, you have instruments that are shared, you have instruments with different reporting formats, there are different challenges around security and governance. But we have to figure out how to connect a lot of these devices. That's step one. Step two is then we have to collect that information. Then over time, understand how that information is going to change. If we run the same process over and over and over again, you detect a little bit of drift, the system should be able to capture that information somewhere. And that'll allow us to mine, model, and simulate. So you want to think, connect, collect, mine, model, simulate. Okay. Everyone should repeat that. Connect, collect, mine, model, simulate. And you'll hear this as you see the presentations over the next couple days. Think about that. Because in order to move up this ascendancy curve and improve your IoT maturity or your digital quotient, digital maturity, as Peter showed earlier, we have to think of all these building blocks. I'm not going to go into the details here, but we have to make investments over time in order to increase the value of that IoT layer. And we're doing this so we can go from hindsight, which is, what went wrong with our assay, to insight, why the hell is our product still on the loading dock in quarantine, to foresight. Can we better predict how to get this product out the door based on our operations and procedures and quality intelligence? That is what's going to save you money. That is what's going to help elevate you into the next role, the next position. If you're creating value there and you're doing it earlier in the product design process, then you can eliminate some of the mistakes and create better value for your companies. So digital maturity, improving that's not easy. It means turning from paper-based or electronic-based systems into a digital business. That is certainly going to be a challenge. We'll hear a lot about best practices for doing that. It means improving the maturity, creating those layered investments over time. And as we do this, it's not just technology. Technology is actually the easiest part. The hardest part are skills and the people. You have to get people to think differently about leveraging technology to enable a new business process. That's the hardest thing. It really is. And that's going to be the digital potential. Focus on all those building blocks to kind of create those new business models. And by bringing those two worlds together, the virtual and the real, you could just imagine what that would mean if you could better characterize, you could better model what a disease looks like, or a laboratory process, or a quality challenge. So IoT and living in the moment. The business moments are really interesting. And I like to lead with this sometimes because the car has really changed. I don't know if anyone here drives a Tesla or has semi-autonomous features built into their car model. But over the next couple of years, almost every car is going to have these capabilities built into it. We already see it with advanced braking. Tesla has capabilities to basically turn their vehicle into a very complex software platform that is enabling new things. And it was just a couple of years ago that we were talking about adding in driver profiles and then the doors to pop out on the Teslas, the user approaches for security reasons. And then a couple of years ago, autopilot got introduced, and there were some comical rollouts for this, but basically most of this capability was unlocked over Wi-Fi, over an update. So the car went from being a vehicle that you had to drive to a vehicle that you had to drive most of the time in order to go from A to B. And what's next? Now we're talking about business moments and new models, because now the car can go to an empty parking spot. You can call it. You could actually engage it to go pick up a loved one. Imagine in a couple of years, when we're all a little bit older, we're not going to have to go move our car, warm it up. It can come pick us up. Life is going to get a lot easier. But the key here is that it's going to create new business models. And it's enabled through technology, and it's done very quickly. And the sensors are the key for that. So the car is basically an IoT sensor-packed type of vehicle now. So thinking about that, what does that mean for the lab? We have roadmaps that we have to develop. You want to think about, immediately what can we do by bringing in a technology and changing a process. Ultimately, how might that change over the next couple of years? But you don't want to say, we need to invest in Watson, or we need to invest in machine learning, or we need to invest in this or that. That's the wrong approach. What you want to do is you want to talk about your roles. You want your quality analyst to better predict what's going to happen, based on a certain ingredient. Or you want to be able to contextualize information and allow scientists around the world to communicate and collaborate on the same piece of information at the same time, rather than having to cut and paste it out of one system and into another. So you want to think about the business needs and what it means for those roles. Don't lead with the tech. Lead with what you're trying to do within the laboratory. And then that will help create a better roadmap. Our big challenge for this is that within research, at least within most R&D environments, we have a lot of different applications. This is the gum wall in Seattle. It's absolutely disgusting. But we all know within a research IT environment, bioinformatics, cheminformatics, lab IT, we got a lot of custom stuff that's done that nobody really knows how to characterize, and it's fairly unsupported by the organization. And then we also have new vendors that we're bringing in, and new techniques and new disciplines, and we have to figure out how to mash this information together. And then, by the way, we have our lab informatics platforms and our core systems for generating information, for improving our capabilities in different disciplines across the product life cycle. And then we have external information that we have to figure out how to bring in. So this is a different ecosystem, for instance, within pharma that we're bringing into this environment, which is internal. And then we have complex data handling and techniques. We have advanced analytics and other types of analytics packages. And it just gets more and more complicated. And you can see intentionally there are a lot of logos on here because this represents what most client environments look like. Take all that, and then you slap on all the regulatory, and then we're moving at a snail's pace. So application complexity, the portfolio complexity, how is this hindering our strive to become digital? And it is, because we're still thinking in terms of applications. We're still thinking in terms of vendors. We're not thinking in terms of capabilities and platforms. So we need to figure out how to clean this up. We need better tools for iterative design and process for the laboratory. It would be nice to be able to have instruments communicate and to have These workflows automatically populate with relevant information and then learn over time. This is something that we've been talking about for a couple years. Finally, there are some tools out there already today that do some of this, but we're starting to see more interest in developing this so we can have better contextualized information within the lab at any given moment in time. I mean, it'd be nice to be able to know when our process variances are exploding or if they're tightening up based on a change to a simple procedure. Now, IoT is everywhere. Probably most of you have at least 20 different IoT-enabled devices in your home today, and that's just going to magnify over the next couple of years. IoT is everywhere, and it's going to keep growing and growing and growing. Unfortunately, it hasn't really grown in the lab yet. I'm not endorsing any companies here, but this company is starting to do some pretty cool stuff, a company called TetraScience. And they've figured out, they've started to commercialize this product that you can basically plug your lab instruments into, okay? And they're not assigned to any specific vendor. They're trying to be vendor agnostic, but capabilities then to chip a lot of your instrument and then communicate a lot of that information, plug it into notebooks and into ERP systems, into office systems. Now, why would we do this? IoT by itself is stupid. It's not going to get us anywhere. IoT analytics to enable new business processes is something that we need to think about. Right now, if one of your freezers goes down, you probably get a warning over email or text. That's 99% of the world. A freezer goes down, somebody gets a text at 2 o'clock in the morning. What about the sample integrity? What about those systems that have to freeze and thaw cycles? How does that get reported? Usually it comes in as like a little flag somewhere, right? But it's specific for an instrument domain. If we can figure out how to better protect our assets with IoT, think about the amount of money that we've spent on reagents and consumables and cell lines. That might have an impact there. Or you have a complex lab, maybe it's multiple labs, and you have different utilization rates across all that equipment out there. Could you use this information to better optimize what your instrument loads need to look like? It's certainly very possible. Or how many times has someone approached you and said, we need to buy a new triple quad mass spec or a new expensive piece of equipment, $1 million plus? Well, everyone claims that it's overly utilized. You can actually track the utilization rates, and then you can populate this into a cloud analytics layer. The company that justified, I've talked to a couple of companies that are investing in this now, they've actually justified it by the cost savings on capital equipment, just doing an investment here. And they're making like $1 million investment in this, but they're saving millions in money that they would be spending on needless equipment. And then load balancing for optimization. So there's lots of choices here for how to use IoT and to communicate that information. Now, I've heard IoT, I've heard Internet of Lab Things, I've heard Industrial Internet of Things. IoT within the labs, whether you want to call it IOLT or IoT, the key here is that this is an area that's growing, and it's growing kind of slowly. But in order to get the highest value, it's not just the research lab or the development lab. You also want to be considering what does IoT mean for Industry 4.0 type approaches within the manufacturing world. So I think it's okay to think about IoT within different subdomains, but the big picture is actually how does that link? How do those domains link? Because that's what enables the new business process. You can imagine leveraging IoT within labs for direct impact on QMS or MES systems, EBR, quality management, and so on, quality intelligence. Now, within your labs, if you're at a pharma company, you might be able to put IoT into your lab environment, but then there's also digital clinical. So the ability to run a clinical trial with remote sensor, remote technology, take the cost out, better chip the patients. There's also mobile health, healthcare, payers and providers, fitness devices. That's a different IoT. Times 5 minutes, got it. And there's research and development implications with that, and then there's also smart home. So you could see here that the IoT environments are starting to link together. They're not quite overlapped yet, but they're getting there, and they will rather quickly in a lot of these different domains. So the story is not single IoT, it's IoT across these different ecosystems, and that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to converge the ecosystems. Once we start to see more of that, and we have these processes that we can measure, then we can start thinking about AI a little bit differently. Now, AI is another one of those terms. You'll probably hear a little bit about it this week, cognitive AI within the lab. Certainly machine learning, deep learning, natural language processing, ensemble learning. These are all disciplines that are all related to artificial intelligence under that umbrella. That's synonymous with cognitive, which is more of a brand. It's also synonymous with smart machines, which tend to be more associated with devices. This all rolls up underneath advanced analytics. And we're doing that so we can have better predictive capabilities and better predictive science. So there's a bit of an ontology here that's important to understand, the semantics. And then we have the rise of virtual personal assistants. Imagine the VPA within the lab that has access to a lot of this information to ask and to curate. And that's going to have impacts on our business process. All right, so for realigning for success, we have a couple of business moments that we've run with clients. So these are kind of like scenario plans. And I'll just go through one of these. I have multiple ones in the deck, which you can look at later. But you can imagine that an R&D group that has LIMS installed, and they've been visualizing, over time, some of their assay results. And the system begins to pick up a little bit of drift before the human does. Now, an AI-assisted data logger might be able to capture some of that and then distribute that information to downstream systems. And actually, the system then starts to notify, based on that insight engine that's always running in the background, that there's been a change. Right? That's not how we operate today. Right now, the human has to initiate the change. Or if it's a system, it's business rules and business logic. It's not learning. Here, the system is learning. It's always running in the background. And then maybe it initiates a DOE, sends a message, logistics systems, supplies get ordered, your CDS, everything else gets upgraded, and then ultimately a team can review this new change, and then you might be able to lead to a suggested engine for upgrading a policy or a procedure or a method. This is real. This is starting to happen now. It's not out of the box by any vendor. You either have to build this or you have to engage a team to build something like this. But here's one example of IoT being used within the lab to create a new capability. Here's another one. Employee comes to the gate, and this is for a company that's actually doing tissue processing for human tissues, so very expensive tissues, very specialized. And there's basically a 1 or 2 hour window for some of these tissues in order to preserve them and to get the right type of activity that can be bottled into reagents. The instruments that are used for this are very expensive, and they've designed a process with basically emission control, the capability to look at this incoming information, to wake up the instruments the moment that someone enters the security carousel, just to get those instruments up to baseline, save about 45 minutes on calibration for some of their equipment, and they're able to get their process done more efficiently. And it wakes up all the different instruments and sends them predictively where they need to be spending some of their effort. So there's like downstream scheduling. But you can use these types of business moments where you look at kind of the catalyst event, and the catalyst event here is the person entering the gate, and then the interactions between the thing, the business system, and the people in order to model what this is going to look like. And this is what those companies that Peter showed that have high digital maturity, they're doing this exercise first before they make any investments. Okay? So it requires some different thinking before you make the investment. All right, let me skip over this because I'm up against time here. One of the most important things, and I'll try and close with this, one of the most important things you can do is you have to think about lab IT and IT changing their mission a little bit. It's no longer about back office support for information systems. It has to slide over, and your support for IT and these business leads needs to focus on connecting the different types of ecosystems. This is a life science example here, but imagine IT connecting to different ecosystems to what I called the nexus of forces before, and then this physical smart-enabled IoT type world. And that's where the big impacts are going to be. And you can imagine, IT being involved or the business processes are being impacted where you're starting to connect your internal systems over here, your research informatics, your lab informatics, your supply chain systems, to these other systems out here. And we've already talked a little bit about regulatory and so on, but as well as that physical connected smart world. If this doesn't happen, then your digital maturity is not improving, and most likely your projects will delay. So you have to kind of change the role of lab IT and information systems personnel to understand the connections to these different types of systems. Now, I took the liberty of looking at all the different topics that were being presented over the next couple days. I've highlighted the ones that are new. IoT, digital, artificial intelligence, and transformation. These are the ones that are uniquely different than what I saw from SmartLab Exchange about 4 or 5 years ago. So as you hear the next couple of presentations, the next couple of days, think about this. Think about the role of IT or IoT and then in the business moment and how it might ultimately lead to change. There's certainly a lot of these, a lot of technology out there that is a bit meaningless. You want to be able to make sure that you can kind of piece through all that and then look at the things that are important across your different industries. All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Time for one question. Otherwise, I have a question, as usual. Michael, you mentioned a thing which triggered my attention. I started that the lab is being seen as a cost center. You also said, hey guys, other industries, they look into, not into, I need a smart device, but I look into the capability, and then they create a strategy around that. So what is your advice to this industry, to the people here, how to make it happen? How can we convince management, how can we convince our organizations that this is the way? Because if the farm industry is so behind, it means that management on that level is behind as well.
Yeah, well, there's certainly a disconnect between what's being mentioned at the board of directors level and then the mission critical priorities and what's going on within systems and labs. Alignment's the first one. So executive sponsorship is you have to have executive sponsorship, otherwise the project's not going to yield any real results. But it also means shifting the role of IT to improve your digital maturity. And one of the ways to do that is to actually look at outside of industry examples. Within pharma, a lot of pharma folks here, there's actually very little inspiration within pharma because we all do things the same way. So you have to pivot, and you have to look to these other industries. I like the F-35 helmet because it represents something new, but certainly you could look at what Allianz is doing with insurance. You could look at what some of the automotive companies are doing with Amazon. There are different types of companies that are starting to come together to create new business models. Uber, obviously, replacing the role of taxi drivers, but these are things where there are digital stories that you might be able to extract and contextualize a little bit for a slightly different space. But it's all about creating value. So I think for the pharma clients, you want to focus on what does this mean for patient centricity? How could IoT and AI and all these other tech, how could that improve patient outcomes, patient centricity? And that tends to resonate. You'll get somebody's ear if you're able to outline that.
Thank you. Right. One more question. So my final question then is you saw the slide from McKinsey on the digital maturity. So how does that relate to your story and your vision to laboratories? Because is laboratory even worse in general, or is it just pharma, or can you say that the laboratory can be mapped to that line as well?
I've seen some really wonderful things happening in laboratories. There's a distribution. I think that they got the relative industry correct. Certainly we know that that's a very conservative industry. I was joking around this morning about the farm industry being very conservative. If we built airplanes, we would crash test every single one. You're supposed to laugh there. It's a recycled joke, though. But we can certainly learn. Insurance and finance and retail are certainly much further ahead. The folks at Adidas and Nike, they're doing digital and wearables and IoT 6-7 years ago. Disney's a great example of leveraging IoT to change the business model. They're just printing money now at those theme parks because they've embraced IoT and a lot of this stuff here. So.
Okay, Mike, thanks very much.
All right, thank you.